So thank you so much for coming on the Goddess Talks, and welcome to those who are watching now and who will watch later. So just so you know, Ariana, I will put this on my Instagram feed, and then I have a YouTube channel that I put them on as well, and they will live there forever. So thank you. Thank you for joining. I am so honored to have you. Thank you so much for coming on and being here. I started the Goddess Talks as a way to initially talk about like living your purpose and answering the call. And what I found is that I was actually just really interested in what people were telling me. And so I've been mostly inviting, it's been a conversation with women, like living goddesses here on earth. And the people that I've had come on, I've asked them less questions and listened more because I feel like people have such amazing stories about how they got to where they are and why they're doing what they're doing, that there's just so much to be told. And so I'm particularly honored to have you, especially, I met you in a weird roundabout way, actually, but I met you on Instagram, actually, I think, because I was connected to your husband through yoga, through my yoga friends. And then I said, hey, are you related to Jordan Bain? And you said, that's my brother. And then that's how I ended up going to the Modern Mystery School, and he became my guide. And then it was just this really interesting way of meeting. And then you became one of my teachers at Kabbalah, which is something I've talked about a lot on the Goddess Talks. I've had some friends from our Kabbalah tree on there, and just in general, it comes up often. And it was an amazing experience that we finished up in March, and excited. I can't wait to do it again. And may become a Kabbalaholic. So Ariana, thank you for coming on. I wanted to just start by asking if you would tell just a little bit about like what you do, who you are. That's a deep question, but what you do in what you
no
do
deeper question than asking a Kabbalist, are you? Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me on. It's really a pleasure to do this. I've never done an Instagram Live, so this is a new experience for me. So I really appreciate you having me on and inviting me to do this. And it is really fun to get to interact with you in this way, because I've only really interacted with you through Kabbalah and through Instagram.
Yeah.
So in terms of who I am pretty multifaceted, but I am a spiritual guide and energy healer. I also started a sustainability consulting company back in 2009, and I pretty much dedicated my whole life to trying to make the world a better place. And I have always sought to find what are going to be the best tools for that. And so I've done all sorts of things, like all different sorts of spiritual practices and yoga and shamanism and Buddhism and Taoism, and also gotten really great training for my mind. So I have a Master's of Science in essentially in sustainability science. It's called Industrial Ecology. And that's what I started my consulting firm with. And that's what I was doing when I found what I do now, which is working as a guide and healer with a Modern Mystery School. And I picked this work because I'd done all these other things before with like the sense of like, there's some piece of healing the world that has to do with practical, technical solutions. And then there's some piece of healing the world that has to do with spirit.
And you said, I asked you prior to the live, and so one of the things I've talked to people about is kind of how did you find your purpose? How did you end up, I suppose, I mean, we would say like your sacred contract and like carrying out your sacred contract. And for some people, it's something they don't know right away. It takes a while to figure that out. You go through, all the things, and whether you have dark night of the soul or you experience a bunch of things before you realize that. But you said something that I thought was really interesting, and you said you've always like known your purpose. You've always lived it. So what was that like as a child? How did you know that what you wanted to do, thinking back?
Well, I think it's really important to differentiate between what we do and what our purpose is.
Right.
Because like our purpose is kind of like, that's like the higher level, like goal or like North Star or guiding light within our lives. But then what we actually do, whether it's like professionally, personally, as a hobby, on a day-to-day basis, whatever it is, it's like those are all, you can kind of see them like they're like tactics and strategy towards accomplishing that bigger goal. So I
Mm.
haven't always known what I wanted to do per se. I wasn't always like, oh, I want to be a spiritual guide, an energy healer, or even I wasn't always like, oh, I want to be a sustainability consultant. It's more along the lines that I'm like, I've always known that I wanted to have a specific kind of impact in the world. That's always been like embedded within me. And I even a number of years ago found a letter that I had written to Santa, and like my Christmas request when I was 7 was like a magic ring that would make the world a better place.
Oh,
It's
oh,
the cutest thing ever.
that's very, very sweet. And so like deep, and children are really egocentric creatures by nature. And so for you to have that in you at such a young age is just so, it's just so beautiful, because really, I mean, most children are not thinking of how to impact the world outside of them, but really like how only in terms of how it can make their own world a little bit better. Generally at 7 is the case, but that's beautiful.
Yeah, so I
And
won't
so you,
ask for anything else in that letter, but it was like that was like my like guiding light is that I want.
that's amazing. That's amazing. Um, and so you said, so you knew that you wanted to do that, but you didn't, it wasn't an instantaneous, so like now I'm doing this, now I know I want to go on this path, and this is so how did you the sustain it sounds like the sustainability coaching and the business kind of came first. Is that
Mhm.
true? So how did what is that actually? What is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, so those things go hand in hand in my mind. So I, my goal has always been to have the best possible positive impact on the world. And so I've always been like, what's the thing that I'm aware of that's the best way to do that? And so, starting in college, I found things like permaculture and sustainability and environmental studies and like working on organic farms and solar energy and like all of those things. And I was like, okay,
Mhm.
this is the thing that makes the most sense to me. Like we've got all this great technology and ideas, like let's apply it and like make the
Right.
world better and grow lots of healthy food so nobody has to go hungry and make lots of clean energy so we stop fighting over it and having wars over it. And like this seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
So I like got my undergraduate degree in that, and then I went and started a sustainability institute in Bangladesh
Wow.
and kind of like cut my teeth on that. And I was like, oh, this might not be working as well as I thought it was going to work. Like it might not be having the kind of impact that I thought I was having. And alongside that, I was already studying like spiritual stuff. I'd studied spiritual stuff since I was a teenager. And so like there was this kind of like this process of like trying different things, being like, okay, is this the thing? This is my best understanding is the thing. How does that work? And then I was like, that still doesn't totally work. That doesn't really solve the problems we have. And I kind of went through that stepwise. And it's like, then I went to graduate school at Yale to like study sustainability stuff and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the more I did that, the more I was like, wow, I have all these great skills and all this great knowledge, but there's still like, I still don't have the answers to what's going on in the world. Like I still like I'm like I keep thinking that the next thing will have the answers, but then each one didn't have like this key of like why do humans harm themselves and each other?
Right.
And why is there this enormous gap between like beautiful intentions and then what actually happens? Like
Hmm.
the road written about there's a book written about international development called The Road to Hell is Paved with Good Intentions, and it's like a history of international development and aid in Africa. And it's like
Right.
so it's like there's all these wonderful, well-intentioned people trying to do
Right.
great work in the world. And it's like beautiful intentions. It's like if people's intentions came true naturally and without effort, just by thinking positively, we'd already have a beautiful, peaceful world.
Right. So,
So
so
that was
where's the disconnect? What is the disconnect? Why, what do you think? I mean, maybe you don't have the answer, but what's the disconnect between I see this vision and I want to do this vision, but people not necessarily, is it that there's not enough people doing it? Is it that it's difficult to sustain? Like what is the reason that it's not necessarily happening in this global way?
yeah. Well, I mean, think of it this way. Do you know anybody around you with bad intentions?
That's a challenging question because, you know, I'm one of those people who assume that people have the best of intentions. I can't say what they're all, maybe they have ulterior motives. I don't know a whole lot of people whose like goal is that I'm going to rain down destruction and that I want like bad things to happen. I think people can have sort of ulterior motives or self-serving motives or things that, bless you, that sort of that more, I think,
Yeah,
but not, no, I don't think I've ever encountered anyone whose sole purpose is a negative intention on purpose. No.
exactly. Like there's almost no human beings where in their conscious awareness of what they're doing is I'm going to do something bad,
Right.
whether it's to themselves, their friends, their family, the environment, anything like that. It's very rare. Like maybe those people exist. I've met very few of them ever.
Right.
And most humans are going around within their narrow and limited perspective, being like, I'm doing the best thing I know how to do.
Hmm.
And that's the case for how people treat themselves, their communities, the environment, people of other backgrounds, ethnicities, races, whatever it is. It's like people think they're doing good
Right.
and they want to do good. Humans are good at their core.
Right.
Like pretty much every human being I've ever met at their core is good.
Yeah.
And so the space between that goodness at the core and what actually happens is the space that needs healing.
Right.
It's like what like what gets in the way of this goodness of the
Right.
core identity, and then what actually happens.
All right. And then there's so many things, right? Because there's so, I mean, whether it be ancestral trauma or, you know, deep-seated wounds from childhood or ego or, you know, greed or, you know, all the things are, like you said, I think those are the things that are in the space between, because like you said, I do like to think, because I do feel that people are inherently good. I don't want to, I'm not a cynical person about humanity. And I do think inherently people are good. And then things happen in their lives that inform the way they behave. But, you know, a child born into this world is not born with an inner evilness or an inner, you know, there's things have happened that then create that. Um, and, you know, you talk about, so a lot of the things you're talking about is sustainability and helping the environment but what's interesting is there's also a large scientific component behind that in what you've studied, correct?
Absolutely.
So, you know, I think the one question I would ask is, and I always find this to be interesting, is when somebody is in a scientific community in so many ways, how does that go with, you know, the spirituality, and how is that received in the scientific community, I guess, and how do you blend those worlds together where you have this very science-minded goal in some ways, but you're a very spiritually in tuned person?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. You know, and
Yeah.
what I see with science is that, you know, until about the 17th century, science and spirituality were like this.
Okay.
And then, you know, it's like, have you ever heard the phrase, like, I think, therefore I am?
Mm-hmm.
It's like Cartesian logic, like, took these apart and, like, broke them and put
Right.
science over here and spirituality over here. And then increasingly has kind of, like, taken spirituality and tried to, like, literally push it out of the frame and have it only be science.
Right.
And ultimately, it's like, science is wonderful. There's nothing wrong with science, but it's not a totality.
Right.
It's like science isn't the whole thing. Like science is a method of asking questions and inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are engaged in that, ideally you should be asking really big questions. And, you know, we say the same thing as Kabbalists. It's like the purpose of Kabbalah is to learn to ask better questions.
Right.
So anybody that really wants to like take a deep dive when it comes to science, ideally should be really taking a deep dive with themselves spiritually. It's not like that actually
Right.
happens necessarily, though. But
Right.
I love, there's a friend of mine who I knew from graduate school who had grown up as an evangelical Christian and had picked up particle physics as an adult.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
finishing his postdoc in particle physics at Yale at the time that I was there. And he worked at
That's
the Large
interesting.
Hadron Collider in Switzerland
Okay.
part-time, and then was in New Haven part-time. And it was hilarious because I was just like, kind of, what do you do with this? Like,
Right.
how do you talk to the particle physicists and be an evangelical Christian at the same time? I was like
Right.
really curious because at least for
There's
me,
a,
weird,
yeah.
like, oh, you're being weird over in the corner, but like evangelical Christianity and science really don't get along a lot of the time.
Well, no, there's a big dichotomy between, the idea of a divinely created universe and then the scientific belief that it was, the God particle, and that's what they call it, I believe. But
Yeah.
it's still a scientific. But I think that, and I could be wrong because I'm not necessarily a scientific minded person, but one of the things that I have found a lot of interesting, almost peace in, is that seeing that there is actually now a lot of science backing a lot of the spirituality, like quantum physics and different things, where it's like, why, I think, and I don't know if it's true, but it almost feels like there is a coming back together to an extent in some ways, where we're starting to recognize that it can be a both and world. It doesn't have to be only science or only creationism, and that there's a logical blending of them, but that our blinders are on in one way or the other, and we're not willing to see the big picture. I
Exactly.
mean, are you experiencing that, especially having been in higher education at such a prestigious university as well? I mean, to be at Yale with very, I would assume the greatest, wonderful minds and highly intelligent humans. What are you seeing in the trend towards? Do you feel that that's true, that are we coming back to it, or is there still a lot to be done? Like, where are we with that?
I think that there's a lot to be done. I think that people in the particle and quantum physics worlds, you're seeing things kind of come back together some, but you don't
Mm-hmm.
really see that in other physical sciences or like in other advanced degrees yet. I think that
Okay.
there's a lot of soul searching happening on the part of humanity, just in
Yeah.
general right now. And that's what spirituality is for. It's for soul searching. And so there is this enormous growth of people who consider themselves to be spiritual but don't have a religious affiliation. And there
Right.
are lots of those people sitting in academia. They don't necessarily know what to do with it yet.
Yeah.
But they're just like,
Mhm.
I know that I'm something more than a physical being,
Right.
but I don't really know what it is, and I don't necessarily want to put somebody else's vocabulary to it.
Right.
But I know that there's something, and I'm curious, and I want to know what it is, and I have some feeling that it's part of what gives my life meaning and purpose. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where, I really hope that with science over time, like spirituality, like the purpose of doing it, if there needs to be a specific sort of day-to-day purpose, has to do with understanding meaning in our lives. Like, why are we here? Like, who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? What's my purpose? Kinds of questions.
Those questions are so familiar to me.
I know, right?
Right?
It's like those are questions that, you take spirituality out of it for a minute. Those are questions that anybody who wants to have a welcome life should ask themselves.
I think we all ask ourselves that anyway. I mean, whether we consciously ask ourselves that or not, can't imagine that there's a human on this planet who's ever just been like, yeah, I'm just here and whatever. There's always someone I would have to imagine that at some point in every human being's life, there's been a wondering of like, why or how or what should I be doing? Because most people don't choose to float through life in this aimless way. but at the same time, it's how deeply I think you want to go. And it's interesting. I was reading recently, I have been reading in solidifying my own sort of coaching practice and what my niche is and who my people are, is that there's this growing desire among just women or people in general, but women really, they want to be spiritual, right? They want to have a spirit, but they don't want dogma. And they don't want the rules and the maybe some of the very patriarchal things that come with that, but they want to have a spiritual connection. And, you know, I think what's so beautiful, and I have to go back to the mystery school because of all the things I've done in my journey in these last 5 years, the thing that has, and there's been so many things. I've gotten Reiki master certification. I've done yoga teacher training. I've gone to online school at Suiha. I've done all of these things, but the mystery school has made everything make sense to me in this way that I'm like, oh, okay. Like it just makes sense. And there's room for science, and there's room for, because it's not a dogma, right? It's not a religion. So there's room for science, and there's room for questions, and there's room for spiritual practices, and there's room for all of these things, but just the kind of larger explanations, I think, every time I would hear you speak or hear your brother speak, and it's these constant mind blowing moments of like, wow, yes, like that's it. And I talk about the mystery school so much to people because I'm like, I just, please try it, because I want people to understand that if anything, it's done a couple of things. It's assured me 100% that there is absolutely a higher power and a creator, God, goddess. Like, I have no doubt in my mind that there is a one truth, many paths situation happening in this world. But it also gives that feeling of like, but there, we can explore things too, and we all have a responsibility to do the things that we're here to do. And for you, your passion is about making the world, making the world a better place can mean so many things, but you do it in this really beautiful way where you try to have like the lowest possible impact on the planet as well, in terms of your actual footprint, and what you do. And so are you still, so with all of the things that you're doing, are you still doing things with sustainability? Are you still working with that?
Yeah, I do both essentially. I work as a spiritual guide and an energy healer, and then I also still do sustainability consulting for corporations.
So that's something that when a corporation comes to you, what are they asking from you?
Usually to become more sustainable, to reduce their impacts. If they're like really progressive, to become regenerative in their impacts, meaning have like put out more like energy, water, materials than they consume, for example, which is possible these days with technology. So,
Right.
those things sit alongside the spiritual work, because it's all the same thing. It's all the same work of making, like actually getting to a point where we as humans get to experience an abundant world that's actually going to be able to continue in perpetuity, as opposed to like us just taking from the earth and taking.
Right.
But I want to rewind for a sec to what you're talking about with, sort of like one truth, many paths is, one analogy that can be helpful is that it's like everybody can agree scientifically that the idea that the top of Everest is the highest point in the world human can stand on.
Right.
That's agreed upon. Maybe
it's measurable.
But it's measurable.
Right.
And there are different routes up Everest, but they're not that many. They're not in routes up Everest. You could try to pioneer a totally new route up Everest. It's possible. I'm not going to tell you not to. That just sounds really hard.
Right.
It's like, it's hard enough to climb Everest. It's even harder to climb it unassisted or without oxygen or any of those things. But you're still climbing up routes that people have set for you.
Right.
And if you try to totally do it yourself, there aren't really like a lot of people creating new routes up Everest on a regular basis.
I love that. I love that.
Like take a route that somebody has gone before and where
Right.
they understand what the pitfalls are and where
Right.
they know where, you know, the the glaciers are and the ice falls and all of those things, but they're not going to do it for you. It's
Right.
That's the role of being a guide, is to be like,
Right.
here's the path. It's not the only path. It's a really
Right.
it doesn't mean that it's easy. Being a good path doesn't mean that it's easy, because
Right.
climbing is never going to be easy, and that's not the point. You don't go to Everest because you're trying to make the climb easy.
Right.
You're trying to get to the pinnacle of what a human can reach.
Right.
So it's not so much about like it being literally easy, but it's like, but how hard do you need to make it on yourself?
Right. And I think that what's beautiful is that that just, is a really good analogy for why we need guides and spiritual mentors, right? Why we should not go about it on our own, and why, religions exist, I think, because, I like to look at it when I talk about the many paths. What I always kind of think of is that we're all getting to the same truth, right? And the truth being the top of the mountain. And really just recognizing that I sometimes use the analogy of like this mirror, like an Elohim or God or God Goddess was like, hey, here's a mirror, here's the whole picture, smash. Each of you can pick up some shards. Now you're all seeing pieces of the truth, but like, let's not argue over who has the right piece, because it's still a piece of the truth. And then it's about finding that path and that guide and that way that gets you to the place where you're reaching the pinnacle, because that's ultimately the solution. That's the goal, right? Is getting to that place. But what I find a lot of solace in personally is knowing that there is a goal, knowing that there is a pinnacle, that there is a truth, that there is something more and bigger, and that each of us came here with that in us, that we're here to do or be or beget whatever that is. And it's just such a beautiful thing to realize that everybody has a purpose here, no matter how that comes, whether it comes from practical knowledge and education and the application of that knowledge that you've learned, or purely spiritual, or a combination of both. And I'm always fascinated by people who not only study science and spirituality, but like, you studied science at Yale. Like that's huge, because I feel that I would imagine you came up against people who were kind of like, you study what now? Like,
Oh,
you
totally.
know, you practice what?
You,
Like,
yeah, no, totally. Because I
yeah,
was my like weeks and in class and my weekends doing spiritual study when I was in grad school.
which is such a dichotomy, but it also makes so much sense, really. It
Yeah.
really does. And so you're doing that. And so how did it go from like, what honed you in, I guess, on the mystery school as your path, I guess, your being a healer, being a guide, being all of the things that you are, teaching the classes that you teach? What landed you there as opposed to continuing with Buddhism, or what landed you there?
Yeah. Great question. I would say that the biggest thing was that it's like going back to what we were talking about earlier, where it's like that gap between intention and then
Hmm.
what ends up happening. Mystery School and the lineage behind it, the lineage of King Solomon, is the only thing that I've found that knows how to actually resolve that gap and to
Yeah.
do it instantly. There are other things that can help with it, that can help you like chip away at certain pieces of it, but there's nothing
Mhm.
that I found that systematically resolves that. And it takes time. It's like I was talking with one of my clients yesterday about like it still takes time, and we don't have like infinite time left on the clock of humanity, planet,
Right.
ecosystem,
No.
climate change, and all those things. And it's like it really takes time to resolve this. But the flip side is like, pretty much anything else, if you don't have initiation and you don't have these tools that we have within the lineage to actually resolve that space between intent and outcome, it doesn't matter how many good people there are with good intents, you're going to keep getting shitty outcomes.
Right.
And so it can seem faster to just be like, okay, well, I'm going to just keep doing only practical work. I'm just, I'm going to build solar arrays, and I'm going to, do like permaculture and organic farming and like regenerative buildings. And like, those are all things that I've worked on, and they're wonderful. But you still have this, like, this gap between intent and outcome from them.
Yeah.
And until you resolve that part, it's like the rest is going to keep going sideways in ways that you don't expect.
Yeah.
And so to loop it back around, like the mystery school is the first thing I found that could, where I was like, oh, this actually can work structurally with this gap. And it can actually consistently help people individually resolve that, because we have to resolve it individually if we want to resolve it for the like, you have to deal with the individual subconsciousness and unconsciousness that is all this junk. Want to resolve it on a collective level as well. Absolutely like a moonshot program.
Well, and I feel that humanity is in this weird time, like, you know how when time is like ticking down and then there's this, all of a sudden you see the clock like going faster. It's like this interesting time because, we talk about Shambhala, which is a whole bigger concept, but like we don't have that much time left for that in the span of how long we've had, right? Like we've had all this time, and now we're kind of at the crunch time for that, and bringing that to the world. But also in the last, not even 100 years, maybe 100 years, I suppose we can say, that one of the things that has happened is that we've done more to our planet and to sort of destroy and deplete it in this teeny, teeny, tiny part of humanity than we've done in all of the millennia of humanity previously. So it's like, oh crap, now we don't have that much time left to get it kind of right and make the earth the way it was meant to be. But also we've really screwed our planet up a lot. So how do we fix that? And there's this push and this crunch, because like, I remember, in grade school, like the whole reduce, reuse, recycle thing, like that was kind of new. And granted, to be fair, it was like 30 years ago, but that's only 30 years ago in the span of millennia. And so these things that we've done, it's like we're trying to undo a lot of stuff that we've done. And it's just it's interesting that I feel like we're all like running out the clock in so many ways. And so like you said, the mystery school, I think, is so important in that way, that it does clear out that it bridges that gap between what's stopping us from doing the things and what's kind of what's around us or within us that is preventing us from saying, like, these are our intentions, and then this is us living out our intentions, and how do we do that? And so, I personally have found it to be just incredible, and, have every intention of continuing on and on and on in it. And then Kabbalah, just separately in itself, was just incredible and amazing and brilliant. And, I think I have to really thank you, I think, for the mystery school, because I never would have, I think I had seen your brother talk to Jayshree, and then it was like months later, and it was just like this, like, oh yeah, go work with him. So like the next week I was like, okay, like, healing, like life activation healing. And then within months, it was like 2 months later, it was, empower thyself. And then 2 months later, it was Kabbalah. And so I feel like it was, that reaching out to you that was like the catalyst of all of those things. So I honor you for being that, even not intentionally, but you brought that to my life. I don't think that I would have done any of those things and it's only been about really a year, a little over a year that I've been doing those things, but and met wonderful people. And I have to say, I've gotten to work with you in a lot of mystery school capacities, but even just talking to you tonight, like, I just have to honor your brilliance. Like, you are just mind-blowingly intelligent in the way that like I'm always like, man, I wish I was that smart. Like you just have this innate intelligence and this beautiful way of melding that intelligence. But I think the reason I didn't know quite how intelligent and educated and you were was because you were so humble as well. And you were such a humble and approachable and wonderful, beautiful goddess that just you don't ever have an air of I know more than or I haven't, there's no arrogance surrounding you. So, you know, the only way to know those things about you is for you to share those things. And it's not like you go around and you're like, yeah, I got my master's from Yale and this is what's, you know, I mean, I would never have known that until I, you know, heard you talk about it and I, you know, read your website essentially. And I've known you for a little while now. So, I mean, that's just, I think, a beautiful thing in itself. I think you're just such a intelligent, like humble, fully embodied goddess in so many ways. And so, you know, one of the questions, and I want to honor your time and because it is late and, but one of the questions,
back around to one thing with humanity kind of running down the clock and is on a positive note. Do you do your best work when you've procrastinated and you're against a deadline?
to be honest with you, I am the worst procrastinator that's ever lived. Okay, maybe not ever lived, but like I am a super procrastinator. It has been part of my DNA since like birth. The only thing I've ever done in my life early is being born before my due date. And
Yeah.
like that's it. Because it's, and I've said this to like any person who's ever been my supervisor at work or people that I've worked with, like, listen, I am not doing this on purpose. I am not intentionally procrastinating, but like, that's who, that is just part of me. But you're right. When it comes to crunch time, I will put in all the extra effort, all the extra time, all the things that have to be done. So it's like, maybe that's the divine design, right? Do you think the design is that if you don't do it, you know, now's the time, get it done. And so maybe there is, because there really is. And I've often questioned, is there a waking up happening in recent 10 years or so?
Waking up happening that's happening on the planet. Definitely an acceleration of all the energies that are available. Doing good. And that's the thing is like we are against the death of humanity, but most people, myself included, do their best work when they've got a deadline and they're kind of like, kind of procrastinated and I have to get this done now. There's not really another choice.
But are we as light workers is what I mean is like, so for me, it was like, is it seeming like people are waking up because I've recently kind of come to this? Or are now we all waking up because we as what I would call light workers are like, we've got to get all the people on board, you know? And so it's like, what is it? I'm wondering what and I don't know the answer to this, but you know.
I see that more people are waking up. It might not always look the same because like we were talking about, there's like many different paths that people are and experiencing, but a lot more people are waking up in a sense. And it's like the waking up is more and more light coming in. Like there's more and more light on the planet for us to use. And more people are kind of like picking that up and being like, oh, I should be doing something with this. And sometimes that's because that light kind of blows up their lives or
true.
Yep. Or that are uncomfortable. And usually spiritual awakening is an uncomfortable process.
It is not an easy process, no.
You know, like, but that like 11th hour, that feeling that people have, it's a great inspiration to be like, okay, it's time to get to work. There's a deadline. We need to bring in Shambhala. We need to bring more light. It's like, we need to help humanity heal and help the planet heal. And those things can be best done when we remember that we're spirit.
Yeah.
Because so long as we're just this thing, like this physical vehicle that we have going, we're screwed. Like you can't solve much from this level. It's like you're always going to tend towards scarcity and eventually dying. It's like our only guarantee once we're born is that we're going to die.
Right. Physical. And our base needs, like we're always going to go towards our base physical needs, which I do think holds up a lot of people, is because there is that survival feeling. But even when there doesn't necessarily have to be.
Yeah.
in this society. But I think that's that's the mindset of a lot of people. But it's people, obviously, like you and all of the guides in the mystery school and people who have been doing this work. I always say, like, I'm so jealous that you've been doing this since you were a teenager, because I wish that I've been doing it for this long. I'm like, crap, I came into this really late. Like, why did it take me until I was 35, until now I'm 40 to be doing this stuff? Because I'm like, oh, I don't have any, like, I wish I had more time. But then I realized that, maybe 25-year-old Allison or 15-year-old Allison just couldn't have done it. Like, it wouldn't have resonated at that time.
Well, if it's any consolation, one, I didn't find the mystery school until I was 30, in all my different spiritual adventures. But my oldest client started when she was 86.
That's amazing. It's never too late, right? Never too late.
Never too late, because it's, like you're talking about, it's like we each have our own unique purpose, and own unique blueprints that we're bringing in our lives. And so you have to trust that it's like you find what you need when you find it and when you're ready for it. And one of the neat things that I see, and like, I don't know enough about your background to speak to it specifically for you, but usually when people start to like wake up and seek to bring more spirituality into their lives, whatever they've done before has some kind of importance to what they're doing now. Like, I've seen this over and over with people like that. They somehow were actually already training in the past for what they're here to do.
So yeah, that makes sense that you say. I mean, my one of my kind of, I guess, fatal flaws has always been that, like, I can identify the person who needs the help, but I was always doing it to like a fault, where it was like it becomes detrimental when you're giving, when people aren't, this really broken person that you're trying to fix. And I didn't have the right tools, but I was like, they need all the help. Right. And so I think you're right. I think my whole life has been doing those sorts of things, but without any support or guidance or really boundaries or any protection of anything, and just kind of all in, like, this person, that honing in on that person who, like, oh no, their life is broken, I need to help them fix it. And so it's certainly channeled this is all channeled that into a much healthier and protected and safe way of doing that. Which, then again goes back to what you're saying, is we end up doing the things that we were meant to do, but we just didn't realize maybe we didn't realize we were training for it our whole lives. Maybe we didn't realize that all the things that happened to us as a child, or the way that, it was always, oh, you're too sensitive. I was always told I was too sensitive. I need a thicker skin, which really meant I was an empath and everything made me feel the feelings, right? And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think that we do kind of train. Maybe we train for it our whole lives, but it's when we're ready that we realize that there's a way to do that and fulfill that contract, but in a way that is healthy for everyone involved, and with intentionality. And you're certainly doing those things, and it's certainly, I mean, our world is just blessed because you and people like you are in it. And that, 7-year-old Ariana was like, I want to make the world a better place. And you still do, which is just beautiful. And so, one of the things I like to ask, like, kind of towards the end of this, is what is the time or the thing that you do when you're like the most empowered version of yourself? Like, what brings you empowerment?
I don't know if there's any like one thing. I would say that the biggest thing in my life has been the path of initiation that we have in the mystery school. And that's both like the word initiation means to begin. So it's not something where you're like, oh, I got initiated and it's like one and done and you never pay attention to it. Yeah, I mean, people do that, but
right,
not nearly as much. But that process, it's like, I can look at my life. I got initiated in December 2011. I can look back on my life and pretty much like drop a pin on a map of my life in December 2011 and have like, there's like a before time and there's an after time. And before time, I mean, there was plenty of wonderful things that I did. Like, there's plenty of wonderful accomplished things I had done in my life. before that. But there's an entirely different quality of my life that happened after that because of the acceleration that the initiation brings into your life, because of the level of self-learning, and particularly because what we talk about in the mystery school is that true empowerment comes from being able to discern what's good and what's not in our lives.
Right.
And like really being able to clearly see that. Because when you can clearly see, well, like this is good and this is me kicking my own butt over here, you stop doing it. Like once you can clearly see it, you're just like, oh, I don't have to do that anymore. Sweet.
Right.
Done with that. And so
Yeah.
that's really ultimate empowerment, is like when you can be like, I can actually consistently discern what is the good in my life. Like what's the higher good? What's actually my higher self?
Right.
And I'm being like, is this my intuition? Is this my trauma? Like, is this going to be good for me, or is this kind of going to lead to unintended consequences, et cetera, et cetera? And it's like when you can actually get to a point where you know yourself enough to consistently choose what's going to actually lead to good in your life, even if it's the harder road, or even if it's something where you have fear or you're scared or whatever it is. When you can do that, it's like there's nothing that can stop you in life. Like that's the greatest empowerment, is to be able to like see that on an ongoing basis.
That's so amazing. And I hope that, I hope that that's what I'm able to do and I'm doing. And I know that one of the things that you do is you work with people to overcome addiction and to overcome like those sorts of things as well. And you talk a lot about like, and a lot of the other people in the mystery school, like there's an intentional sobriety around it, not necessarily because of addiction, but an intentional staying in full consciousness at all times, which, is something that I've personally, like I've never really been a big imbiber of anything. Well, not since college anyway. But, but I've realized like why that's important, because it's like, does it serve you or does it put you at a risk for, negative things to happen, or what risk is it? So the fact that, you have that power over yourself and your choices, which a lot of people feel, I think, that they're victim to their choices or a victim to their circumstances. And so you're basically I feel like you're saying is like, no, that's not accurate. You can make the choice to do or not to do, or to have or not. Like it just might not be the easier choice to choose the right thing. But there's such power in realizing that like your circumstances and your choices don't dictate you, but you dictate that.
And that it's really important in that to realize that it's like you can be a victim in a specific circumstance. Like people can be
Right.
victims of awful things that do.
Right.
There's no rhyme or reason or explanation, and it's not their fault. It's not their karma. It's not something that they asked for. But it's always within our power to be like, okay, that happened. What am I going to do about it now? And it's like empowerment always lies in realizing that we, no matter how bad things have gotten, we have some level of choice. And initially, all of those choices might be actually really rough ones. They might be really hard choices. They might be really painful. They might take a lot of work or a lot of energy, but that there's still always some kind of choice. And that once you start exercising those choices, even when your initial circle of choices all suck, essentially, keep out. And the more you exercise like those spiritual muscles, the more you're like, oh, I actually have a reasonable level of choice in my life. I have a reasonable level of empowerment. I'm never going to have full control over it, but I can have more and more choice about what I experience. But that's something you really build up over time. It's not something that like happens overnight for people.
Right. And so, okay, so we call this the goddess talks, because ultimately, I think we're all, as females, we're embodiment of both, right? There's always the masculine and the feminine and the balance and all of that. But, I feel like we're goddesses on earth. That's what we are. We are the goddess. We are the embodiment of the goddess. And, in so many ways. But I feel that there's people, I don't know that there's some people who can be their goddess self all the time. They are fully in that at all times, and that's beautiful. And then I think there's other people who, for myself, there's these circumstances where you're like, okay, now my goddess is coming through. Like this is where you can see the goddess. And one of my examples that I've used is, so Beyonce, and I just really like that she has Sasha Fierce, right? Like her thing is my stage presence, the person who comes through in my music isn't the me that's at home, like on the couch, but it's this other person. It's this other personality. And like, that's her goddess self when she's performing. And so for me, I think like my goddess self tends to come out more when I'm like speaking, or, using words in some way. What is the action or the thing that you feel, or maybe you always feel your goddess self, but if not, is there certain circumstances or times where you're like, yes, I am the goddess right now. Like this is when I'm my goddess self.
Yeah, good. That's a great question. I love the example of Beyonce and Sasha Fierce. Because there is within each of us, there's like this god or goddess aspect within us that's always
Right.
to express itself. It's like that's like our trying to come through us. I mean,
Right.
whenever you understand it, and it's like, being a goddess can look so many different ways for people.
Right.
Not just like one thing. It's like it's not all like flowy robes and crystals, even though that can be fun.
Right.
Different depending on the person and what archetypes they're here.
Right.
And so, for me, like one of the things that brings me the most joy is teaching, and just like really like flowing energy and light to people. And like you've been in my classes, and it's such a wonderful opportunity to like bring forward like those higher aspects of ourselves, because the best version of ourselves comes forward when we're like inviting other people like up into the light and being like, hey, you want to change your life? Come on up here. It's pretty sweet. You don't have to if you don't want to, but like we're going to be hanging out over here and having a light party.
Yeah. And I'd have to validate that for you, because when you are taking control of a conversation, or when you take control, like you stand in front of a class, or you are, even when you just like, you have this beautiful ability to project, like you do not need microphones, which I love. But when you do those things, it's so, there's no question of like, who is the person who is being the leader right now? Who is the person who is taking the stage right now in terms of teaching? Like it's all eyes on you. And there's you glow in that way where it's like, okay, like and to the point where it's like, because I think what makes it such a goddess energy is it's not just you being like, I'm here and listen to me, but it's like, I want to listen to you. You want to fall into what you're saying. You want to engage with it, because what you're saying is being said with such truth and honesty and integrity, and really coming from your soul. So I think you're very right in saying that's a very goddess self of you. Like the teacher self of you is very much that. I mean, I think you're a goddess all the time, but I think there is something really special about the way you teach and what you do when you are speaking to a group, and the way you command the room in a very beautiful way. So I really want to honor that, and that you know that, because that's so important. And I hope that you continue to do that in all of the ways. And so before we go, I just want to ask, again, people will watch this later, hopefully. How can people work with you? Like what can they do to get in touch with you? How can they find you? What can they do?
So 2 best ways to work with me, we're on Instagram live right now. I've got a link in the bio. You can do a free consultation. There's like a little booking link there. Is a great opportunity to connect with me. And you can also, if you want to explore more, you can go to my website. It's www.arianabain.com. And you can read much more about my work there, both with people who are in leadership positions and also with addiction and trauma healing.
Just putting in your link here. So, and then can people book with you on that? They can book different services with you.
Yeah.
On your website.
Get to know people before helping them decide kind of like what path to take. And
Right. Right. Okay. And as far as, say a corporation's watching, is there, or someone who works at a corporation who is interested in sustainability, is there ways to figure that out on your website as well?
I actually have a separate website for that I've had for a long time, which is metabolicconsulting.com.
Okay. I'm going to put that in there too. Um, and hope that I'm spelling metabolic. I'm pretty sure that I got that one right. Um,
ABIC.
Consulting. Awesome. And so hopefully, you never know. And so I thank you so much for coming on. I'm so honored that you took the time to come on. You are a very busy human, and I know that. So that you took time out of your week and that all of to come on and speak with me means so much to me. So thank you so much. I will hopefully speak with you soon. I'm hoping that the next solstice ceremony in you said Mabon, that I will be able to join you at the mystery school then. And in the meantime, I wish you all the love and light and all of the things that's going on in the meantime.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me on. It's really an honor
Thank
and
you.
a joy to spend this time with you and connect more and chat about
Thank
what we.
you.
And I really hope to see you soon. Lots of love.
I hope to see you soon.